Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,000 comedians for nearly 50 years. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today. It's Shalaka Kurup. Yay!
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
All good, all good. Just dealing with the post Edinburgh Fringe.
Oh, tell me about it. I
Oh,
I went for 6 days,
yeah.
which normally I go for nine. Just we're recording this straight after the Edinburgh Fringe 2023. I went for 6 days. I got in at 5 a.m. every night. I just went through my 56th birthday, and I can't do it anymore.
I
That's
love that you said you went through your 56th birthday and you can't do it anymore. I know people who are I'm turning 30 this year and I was like, I can't do this anymore. So good on you for going out every night till 5
well, as,
a.m.
well, as long as I can move, I will go and see comedy. So
Yeah.
so I've worked out I think it's when it's 100, I'll be 80. So as long as someone can push me around in a wheelchair if need be, I'm going.
I feel like at this point you have a lot of people who willingly volunteer to push you around in a wheelchair to get to comedy gigs.
Well, you're very kind. You really are. I had an amazing time. I saw 32 shows in 6 days, which was exhausting, but
Yeah.
just the best. Anyway, enough about that. This interview is about you. Thank you so much for being my guest today, and we're going to go right back to the start.
Yeah.
And can you tell me, please, how did you become a comedian in the first place?
So I started doing science comedy back in the day, in 20 something. And this was pre-pandemic. And science comedy is, I don't know if people know what it is, but it's essentially education, but also making people laugh. It's like
Sure.
public engagement, that sort of thing. And then through the pandemic, I got the opportunity to meet and be part of a group that introduced me to a lot of people who did stand-up comedy. And then after the pandemic, I was determined to try that out. And I did my first gig in my first stand-up comedy open mic night in October 2021.
Wow. So
Yeah.
very recent, really.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. How many gigs have you done in total?
I don't know. I was keeping track up. I kept track up until 110, and
Right.
now I've lost count since then. 110 was probably last March.
Right.
Uh, so quite a few. Well, for my time, I guess.
So, when did you start off with your comedy by going into pubs and taking friends along, doing 5 minutes and getting
Yep.
in that way? Yeah.
Yeah. Not friends. Sometimes friends, but mostly I have a very patient and kind boyfriend.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, who's been to a lot of those gigs as my bringer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because normally, if a new comedian is starting out,
Yeah.
and they will ask me, I've been to about 10 of their first ever gigs, and I've
Yeah.
laughed in all the right places and all the rest of it. So I've always been the friend.
Yeah. I wish I knew you there then. It would have been very useful.
Well, I've seen you many times, and your act is so enthusiastic that you cannot fail not to like you. So
Oh,
so so
thank you
when
very
so when I
much.
sit there, I'm just it's just joyous. Um, can you describe your first ever gig? What was it like? How did you feel?
So the first ever gig I did, I decided it was going to be because I had to rip the band-aid off at some point. So I booked it for the day before my birthday. And I
Right.
was like, I'll do this gig. If it goes badly, I'll just stay out drinking. And at 12 a.m., it'll be my birthday. Um, it was really good. I got very lucky. It was a bringer gig, but I got very lucky to do this gig because it was the nicest environment. It's Freedom Fridge in Kentish Town,
Right.
and the MC Andy Onions is the most energetic man of all time.
Yeah.
It was a lovely gig. And I'm not gonna lie, for the nerves, I was fairly hammered through a lot of it. Um, I remember going. I
So can
went
you
on stage.
remember it?
I remember having a good time, and I
Yeah.
remember going on stage and getting all my words out, doing all my jokes, and everyone laughing, and then coming off stage being like, I think a lot of my friends who are comedians say this, where you do your first couple of gigs, and I had that feeling where you come off stage and you're like, put me on Apollo. I'm amazing. And then you go back and watch the video 6 months later and you're like, oh no, that's
Well,
embarrassing.
I say to a lot of them, I can imagine it's all experience. It's all
Mhm.
experience. Every gig you do, and I
Yeah,
always say that you have to have a bad gig in order to become a better comedian. Would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of the best experiences I have in terms of improving my comedy has been gigs that I get off stage and I just bury my head in my hands.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, but it's really good. It's very a dad attitude to things, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I guess. So
Yeah. I had to go once, at stand-up comedy. Once was enough. This was years and years ago. I've told
yeah,
all comedians this. I know a promoter. I knew a promoter.
yeah,
I just passed my driving test in Carlisle, so I had a script ready about me crashing cars in Carlisle.
yeah,
He said to me, "This is great." He said, "We've got a gong show that is Monday afternoon. It couldn't be worse time or whatever. But I went on, and there was three people sitting in the crowd.
yeah,
And of course, if you're rubbish, they gong you off. So
yeah,
I walked out and I said, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. People think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the ski jumper, but I can't see the resemblance myself." And of course,
yeah.
I'm his double. And I thought that was a brilliant opener. And some old fella at the back just went, "Fuck off!" and got me off. And I walked up to my own footsteps, and the promoter said, "Have another go." I said, "I don't know whether I can do it again. Never say never again." But
Yeah,
I think my calling is sitting in the audience, supporting them all, because it is an amazing thing. I can imagine when you do get laughs. It must be
yeah.
like not a drug, but it must be an elation, to hear an audience laugh.
Yeah, it never gets old. It never gets old,
Yeah.
especially now for me, it's when you try a new joke and people laugh.
Mm.
That's the best feeling
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
world.
Because of course, when you write material, you think it's the funniest thing going, and so once it's gone to an audience, and you think, right, I'm keeping that in. That's.
Yeah.
So, what do you generally like to talk about on stage? Do you have any themes or anything like that?
I don't think I have themes. Um, I I find it the easiest to talk about things that I personally experience or know about,
Right.
which I feel like is the case for most people. I find it a lot harder to do like uh, abstract like
Yeah.
abstract thoughts or think about like I think anything that I've personally experienced, gone through, or have a reaction to is the material I write about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And from that, tell me about your writing process for a routine or a show. How do you go about creating the ideas, thinking the ideas up?
It's it's a few different ways. Sometimes very rarely, but it's the best feeling in the world where you're just at a gig or just about to go on stage and you think of something really funny and you just go on stage and say it and you're like, oh, that's a new joke. Um, and I hope and pray for that every single night. But broadly, I have a notes app which has anytime I think of something interesting or funny or something's happened, I write it down in the notes app.
Right.
And then when I force myself to sit down and write at some points during the week, I just open it up and try to develop them into actual jokes.
So would you say if it's more up to date? So for example, I suppose if you're writing a joke about something that's happened in the news, if
Mhm.
it's newer, if it's like happened yesterday, would you say that's more relevant, or um, is that just a specific avenue to go down, if you see what I mean? Because you're talking about news or whatever. You're not talking about your personal life, which could be ongoing.
Yeah.
But certainly, do you think if you get more up to date with the comedy that you talk about, do you think that helps?
It definitely helps push you to write.
Yeah.
So recently, the joke I've just written, for context, at the point of recording, India was talking about changing its name,
Right.
Which is the joke I've recently written. But it's also kind of freeing where you write a joke, and if it's a mediocre joke, you're like, at least it'll be out of the news soon, so I never have to do this joke again.
Yeah.
But it's good. Finding stuff in the news that I personally relate to is good for forcing myself to churn out like at least something new.
That's really interesting. And what do you think makes a good comedian? Do you think that's a good question?
I think it's a good question. And I think it's a good question because it made me wonder for a very long time when I first read it. I was like, oh, I've never thought about this before. But I think people always say it's about the jokes. And it is. It is always about the jokes and how well like you write them. But because it's a live performance, it's being in the room, it's I think being sharp, being likable, being watchable, all of that contributes quite a lot to being a good comedian.
I agree. I think there's two things. I think you ultimately you've got to be funny, but the other one is you've got to be relatable, likable, very amenable.
Yeah.
I always remember when I first launched this blog, and certainly the blog in 2018. I went to a half-day writing course, and because I didn't have a clue, and I went, and there was 6 people around me, and they all wanted to be reviewers. And the woman was really she ran it like a business instead of a passion, and they said she would have a go at them for their answers about why they wanted to be reviewers. She came to me and she said, we forget why we've invited you here, which was charming. But I said, well, I'm not a reviewer. I'm not a diarist. I'm not a critique. I'm a member of the audience out to have a good time. And my blog is extremely positive about the whole art form. And it never bothered me again. so I think because you're positive, and I think it's the same on stage, if you go out wanting as though it's your first ever gig, and you're so enthusiastic for it, then you're bound to get a good reaction. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree. I think you, to some extent, like the audience isn't stupid. They can, if you go out being negative, like I've definitely had gigs where I've looked around the room, I've looked at the audience, I've looked at how the other acts have gone on, and I've definitely gone on stage with a perception of how it's going to go. And I think that's one of the things that I learned I had to break out of, because the audience can read that on your face. They know when you don't want to be there, they can see it. No matter how hard you try to muster up fake enthusiasm, they see right through it.
Yeah.
So it's better to just treat it like.
Having said that, and from at the top of the chat, I said that I've seen you a few times, and every time you've been very, very amenable on stage. You've been very outgoing. I can't imagine ever you having a bad gig, but can you tell me what has been your best and worst gig, please?
Best gigs, so many. But in terms of how I felt, just because of the milestones it hit, the first time I did a 5 at the Comedy Store.
Wow.
The any gig I've ever done at the Bill Murray.
It's such a good venue. Yeah.
It's always such a lovely time there.
Yeah.
And the first time I performed at Leicester Square Theatre, not because it went well, just I felt like this was a huge momentous occasion in my life.
That's brilliant. That's so good. And
Yeah.
what about the worst ones?
So there's two for this. One is it's an open mic night in central London.
Right,
And how it works is you just sign up on the day,
right,
which means comedians, because a lot of us don't have jobs, start the gig starts at 7 p.m. and it's first come, first serve. So
right.
a lot of people start queuing up to sign up for this gig at 4:45. And so you turn up, you put your name down, and then you just stand outside. And I did it in maybe February or something like that last year. So you just stand outside in the cold, just waiting for the gig to start because
So
they won't let you in.
you're not in the best of moods before you.
Yeah. And every comedian there was a very young man. And uh, just the comments,
Yeah,
they completely forgot I was there.
not,
So the way they were talking to each other, I was like, oh, I'm very uncomfortable right here.
yeah,
And the gig itself was fine, but the entire experience as a whole was it's one of the only times I've said I'm never going to do this again.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
It's
then oh, sorry.
it's interesting because I did a degree in theatre performance and English
Mhm.
I didn't finish, but most interestingly in there, they said to me that if you go to a creative event like a comedy show or a theatre show or films or anything, the whole experience starts from when you close the door of your house,
Yeah,
and if you get there in a bad mood, you're going to have a bad game. And it's similar to that, you know,
yeah,
whatever circumstances were around you uh,
yeah,
in that moment, you weren't in the best place to go and perform.
yeah,
That's so true.
yeah.
And when you mentioned the Comedy Store and the Bill Murray, I've been there many times. My first experience of going to the Comedy Store was 1988,
Oh,
and
wow.
on the bill was lovely Linda Smith, God
Yeah,
bless her. And on the bill was Richard Morton, John Maloney, compared Phil Jupitus, and it was just it was just an
yeah,
incredible place. And you thought, I love this. This is my home.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I just love to go to comedy nights. It's so much better, obviously, live.
yeah, yeah, 100%.
But no, I can't. As I say, I can't ever imagine you having a bad gig. So
Oh,
well done, you.
oh no, I remember going on before a gong show at Vauxhall, and I was so nervous. I had two glasses of wine, and then I was like, oh, that's too many glasses of wine. So I had a Red Bull, and I went on stage, and everything was shaking. My hands were shaking. I couldn't
Oh,
get my
dear.
words out. I got gonged off
Too much
so
sugar.
quickly. Yeah.
Oh dear.
It's still a good learning experience because I learned to not drink before going on stage. So,
Again, all experience. Um, you mentioned before about nerves. How do you cope with any nerves before a gig, and how do you combat them? Do you combat them?
I feel like I don't know yet. Um, I don't feel nerves before most gigs, but once in a while, I mean, when it's a bigger gig or something that I've been looking forward to, it does happen. And every time I go through that situation, I think about the other times I've been in that situation, and I can't remember what I did. I'm like, no, I must have a plan for this, and I'm just sitting there thinking about how I should have a plan for this, and I never do.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just I try to breathe in and out quite a bit.
I was just going to say, do you have any rituals? Do you have any techniques to combat the nerves? Or
I'm a pacer, so I pace quite a bit,
right,
just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Um, and I try to basically walk it off,
right.
but in small shots, pacing steps. Yeah.
Would you say that as soon as you speak into the microphone, or as soon as you get a laugh, that the nerves go?
I always thought that was the case. But recently at the Fringe, I remember one night where I was emceeing at the Reserve, and it was the first night emceeing. And every first at the Reserve, like the first time you open, the first time you're in the middle, the first time you're at last, made me feel really nervous.
Yeah, yeah.
So the first time I'm seeing, I felt nervous. And I remember going on stage, and getting the laugh, but completely, my mind went completely blank. And I think it went well, but my leg was shaking through the entire time I did my first 10 minutes. So I had to keep walking around the room so people would notice that my leg was tremoring. Um, it was,
Who are you?
yeah, it was so bizarre.
I feel
So
sorry
bizarre.
for you.
Yeah.
But of course, professional, one through, just carry on and the show must go on and all that.
Yeah.
How do you remember all your routines? Do you have a way of remembering them all?
Yeah, I have a very scattered. I have a few Google Docs that have jokes on them. So once
Right.
in a while, I'll go back and look at old jokes. But what I do is I have notebooks where every night I'll write down, if I'm going on stage, I'll write down all the jokes I'm going to do that night. And then after that, not based on how it went objectively, based on how I felt, I'll give it a score. Um, yeah, and then I mark the jokes that I think went well, the jokes that were okay, the jokes that did not go well, and I compare them to each other.
That's brilliant.
At one point, I'm going to make a graph.
Well, no. Ken Dodd and Bob Monkhouse infamously had joke books.
Yeah.
Ken Dodd had a giggle map of Britain. So
Oh,
wherever
wow.
he toured,
Yeah.
he knew which jokes would work in which town. So obviously keeping a book of them is
Yeah.
not only like my blog and archive, but also if you want to have a joke about a car, you've got loads of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's great,
Yeah.
so it's a really good way of doing it. I the most creative thing I've done other than this blog
Yeah.
was to write and appear in a play that I wrote for we put it on for Comic Relief,
Mhm.
called The Applicant. It's basically about me coming down from Carlisle to London, and I've got a successful girlfriend who's got a very successful job, and I've never had an interview in my life. So it's
Yeah.
a series of interviews. And so my mate who did it with me was very good at accents and played all the interviews, and I was the main character.
Yeah.
So I would walk on stage and look very nervous in the waiting room and then start talking to the audience. So I wrote monologues to create the stories. So we rehearsed this for about 10 weeks. First night I did it, we did 3 of them. The first night I did it, I completely forgot the monologue.
Oh, no.
And I was like a rabbit in headlights. I want to go home. This is just
Yeah.
fun. Would you say that it's similar with comedy because I'd written something
Mhm.
and it was a play. I think it's slightly different, isn't it? Because you've got something, you've got like the audience or something like this to play off if you can steer it back. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've definitely had experiences where, especially when you're first starting out
Yeah.
and you know all the things you've written, and then you forget on stage.
Right.
And then you're panicking because you're like, no, I've written it. I've written it. Just dial back, try to remember, try to remember, try to remember.
Yeah.
So I know exactly that feeling where you just look at everyone and it's almost like an out of body experience where you're trying to figure out how to get through this situation.
Yeah.
But I think theater and plays are in that sense a lot harder
Right.
because you can't just switch it off and be like, oh, what do you do? What job are you? How long have you been together? You can't do that with theater. You can't
You
just
have to
turn it
follow a
into
script.
exactly. So I think that's a lot more
Yeah.
worrying than the stand-up.
I was once in an amateur dramatic group in the civil. I used to work in the civil service,
Mhm.
and we put on The Odd Couple. Which I love Neil Simon
Yeah.
and his plays and films and everything. And we put The Odd Couple on, and I played Oscar, which was
Yeah.
fantastic, the Walter Matthau role in the film.
Mhm.
And it was a fantastic script, but it was like over 1,000 lines. And I thought, I'm not going to get this.
Yeah.
It was so stressful remembering it all.
Yeah.
But of course, when you've got other people on stage, you can bounce off them, which is so good.
Yeah.
And with the play that I wrote, certainly when the other chap came on who played the interviewers, I brought it back because I
Yeah.
knew which interview it was and etc. So
Yeah.
so there are points, and I think it's like remembering all your routines. I don't know whether you've got pointers in your head that steers you through the material.
Do I have that? I wish I was as professional as that. I
Well,
just, if I forget, I just think of in the moment any joke that I've ever written in my life, and I just say it. And then once I say it, I feel better.
yeah,
And then I
yeah.
just go through every joke I can remember from that point onwards.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Let's move on to Edinburgh itself. We've just come back from the 2023 Edinburgh Fringe. I've been very fortunate to go for the last 17 years. I've been
Wow.
going since 2005. It's my holiday. I normally go for a week.
Yeah.
Tell me about your first ever experience of the Edinburgh Fringe. Did you go up as a punter? Did you appear in a with a number of comedians, or have you ever had a solo show there? That sort of thing.
This year was actually my first Edinburgh Fringe.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
ever watching,
Oh,
doing
wow.
everything. Yeah. Um, it's just because most years it was just too expensive, or
Yeah.
we'd
Yeah.
have other plans, or I'd probably the first few years of living in the UK, I would be in India for summer. Um, so this is my first year of going to the Edinburgh Fringe. It was everyone tells you about what it's going to be like and prepares you, but nothing can prepare you for that experience, especially for a whole month.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm still recovering. I've been back for 10 days, maybe. No, yeah, 11 days. And my body's still recovering. And I think everything that's happened to everyone at the Fringe is happening to me now, where I'm feeling the after effects of the sleep. I'm feeling the tiredness. I'm starting to lose my voice. I've got
Yeah.
Fringe
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
11 days after the Fringe is finished.
Yeah.
Um,
It is. It's the most incredible experience, but it's so right, sadly, about the prices of it all.
yeah,
They do need to put a price cap on accommodation,
yeah,
on prices of food and drink. You know, they need to make the Fringe more accessible and be
yeah,
a Fringe again.
yeah,
Because over the years that I've been there, for example, one of my favorite places is the Pleasance Courtyard. I
yeah,
love the grunginess of it all.
yeah,
And when I first went, that was exactly like that. It was like there was no advertising, no pre-built restaurant
yeah,
hut or anything like that. And I thought this is not what the Fringe should be. So um, certainly I was invited to the Comedy Ish Awards in the Three Sisters pub, for
yeah,
example, the new Edinburgh Awards. And I
yeah,
went there and I had the time of my life.
yeah,
And I thought, this is much better, than, but it was all still wonderful because what counterbalances that is the experience of going.
yeah,
As soon as you step off the train at Waverley, it just hits you. And
yeah,
it's the most joyous thing.
yeah,
And I always have a little wobble when I'm there because I invite a load of friends from all over Britain. I do a spreadsheet and the planning is meticulous
yeah.
and I was a bit fed up one night and I always have a little wobble and a comedian friend of mine said, let's go for a drink. He said, your joyous enthusiasm in an audience is just fantastic, and
Yeah,
it was all the lift I needed. They needn't have said it, and
yeah.
from then on, I thought, well, all these comedians are exhausted after 25 days, so just enjoy. And I did,
Yeah,
and I had a great time. But
yeah,
certainly, everybody was saying, unfortunately, they need to cap the prices.
yeah,
Definitely, yeah, because I'm in that news article about the theatre group that won £10,000, and the reply was, "Oh, it'll help go towards accommodation." That's
oof,
disgraceful.
yeah,
That is disgraceful.
yeah,
So because the Fringe should be open to all, and
yeah,
I'm very working class from Carlisle, and the working class comics certainly
yeah,
are being squeezed out, and it's
yeah.
not right. Anyway, enough of it is an amazing
It
experience.
was
Will
better
you?
than anything I'd expected.
Did you do a few spots then while you were up there? Or were you just a punter?
No, I went up with the Comedy Reserve at the Pleasance.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you
Yeah.
did say. Yeah, yeah. So
So I
you were
did
there
that for the
for 25.
month. Yeah, and then a couple of other spots. I did the Western Newark Showcase. It's
Yes, yeah, yeah,
every
yeah,
month.
yeah.
That was so much fun as well.
Brilliant.
And just any other spots I could. pick up as
So
I went.
the Comedy Reserve, I didn't get there this year. I
Mhm.
saw one with Josh James and Lily Phillips one year,
Yeah.
but these are three comedians who do it's 20 minutes each for an hour, isn't it? So it's an hour
Um,
show.
it's this year it was 8 comedians,
Oh, it was eight, was it? Oh,
but
wow.
split across two shows.
Right,
So four and four, doing
right.
15 minutes each, over an
Oh,
hour.
brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah.
Have you had any experience of other fringes, other festivals?
Leicester Comedy Festival. Just I did 2 weekends there. Sorry, Fringe flu.
Right, right, okay.
I did 2 weekends there, and that was also such a lovely vibe. I think
Leicester's one of the best. It really is.
it's so good, and everyone is so nice, so
Yeah,
nice.
yeah,
Jeff and Charlotte,
yeah.
they really, really help you out. So
We
I love
had
that.
we had Jeff on here talking about the
Yeah,
whole process of it all. He's a lovely bloke, and
yeah,
30 years he's done really well. I think it's
yeah,
an amazing story.
yeah.
Leicester's wonderful. Have you done any more?
No, I haven't. I'm going back. I think I'm going back to Leicester next year.
Yeah,
Camden Fringe, unfortunately, I end up missing because of Edinburgh.
yeah.
Um, and I've not tried Brighton yet, but I hope to get there.
Brighton is very good. Hastings is excellent. Like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Hastings is really good, and the
Yeah.
two that run it have been on here.
Yeah.
I've been going 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
And Hull in November is another good one. Gary Jennison and Jed Salisbury run
Yeah.
it, and that's supposed to be a really good one as well. So I've never been to the Hull one, but
Yeah.
they're always at Hastings and Brighton and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah. To date, what has been your comedy highlight since 2021?
Oof.
Have you
So
got one?
many. I have so
Apart from
many.
this.
Actually, I'm not gonna lie. I remember before I started doing comedy, when I decided I was gonna do it, it was during the pandemic where I'd watch, I think I've told you this already, but I'd watch the ABC online gigs,
Yes,
and they'd always give you a shout out. And when I
yes.
decided I was gonna do comedy, one of my goals was I'm gonna do a gig and I'll have Rich Gill in the audience, and then I'll meet him and get that photo with him. And when we eventually got
Rather
the
see
photo,
me do this with the guitar. You know,
yeah,
like with ABC,
yeah,
I if it's live, I get up and sing if they want me to get up and sing. And the whole joke is,
yeah.
of course, I can't sing a note. And I thought I found an old tennis racket, so I started playing a guitar in the front, and that took off. But we're gonna come on to this a bit more later. But
Yeah,
they are very good at what they do,
yeah,
ABC, and that's why they gained the audience that they got. If you can do online gigs well, then
yeah.
they deservedly did the same thing. So well, thank you. If I'm part of your comedy highlight, that's wonderful.
Yeah. There's also so many that because you forget to have gratitude, and I need to
Yeah,
remember to start writing things down. There's so many things that have happened that I've just kind of taken for granted. Like I always remind myself that 2 years ago, performing in front of Daniel Sloss would have given
wow.
me an aneurysm, and I got to do roast battle, which is my
Oh,
favorite gig of
brilliant.
all time, in front of Daniel Sloss.
That's
And
brilliant.
I it just kind of went over my head where I was like, oh yeah, great. That was a fun night. Oh, I got to meet Daniel Sloss, fantastic. And but now when I think about it, 2 years ago, if I someone had told me that I get to do a roast battle in front of Daniel Sloss, I probably would have passed out. So
Wow,
yeah, it's
that's such a good story. So many memories when
yeah,
you do it every night or every week or whatever, you know, the gigs and
yeah,
everything. You build up, and there's so many books behind me about. I love reading about stand-up comedians, some of the
mhm,
stories through going through the process of being a stand-up.
yeah,
Fantastic, you know. It's such a joyous medium, I think,
yeah,
and I think that's what I try and give off enthusiasm and support for everybody who wants to get out and have a
yeah.
go. Um, have you any ambitions to be a comedian? To be a comedian, have you any ambitions as a comedian? Would you like to be on TV? Would you like to have your own quiz show? Anything like that?
I think my dream was to always, unfortunately, it's a dream that may not ever come true, but my dream why I wanted to, what got me into stand-up comedy was through the pandemic. For months and months and months, I went back and watched every single episode of Mock the Week.
Oh, wow.
And my dream was to one day be sitting where Reese James sits next to Dara, or
Wow.
and be there and mock the week. That would have been my ultimate goal. Not even be Dara, just sit next to Dara O'Brien in mock the week and do bits.
I've met
That was my comedy dream.
I've met Dara, I've met Ed Byrne, I've met
Mm,
Andy Parsons. They're all wonderful.
yeah,
And what is disgraceful is why Mock the Week is now no more, because
yeah,
why are the BBC showing repeats instead of doing a new series?
yeah,
It's not good, because there are so many. It's such a good grounding for comedians to develop.
yeah,
Um, but that's a cracking answer. I've been in the audience for a recording of it,
yeah.
and it's so good.
Yeah.
They were very, very good at doing it. How have you found online gigs as opposed to live gigs? Did you do many online gigs in the pandemic? Or
I did. I did a couple of science comedy shows. We did a couple of comedy slash mostly storytelling nights
yeah,
that my friend and I ran. I hated it. I'm not gonna lie. I did not enjoy it at all. I found it really. I'm trying to think. The one positive is you can have all your entire set next to the screen,
yeah.
so you can read off it. But beyond that, did not enjoy it. It just hearing what felt like silence while you spoke for a long period of time. Mm-mm.
What was very interesting about it is, as I said earlier, if it's done well,
Yeah,
then there was an audience there, because obviously there was nothing alive at the time.
yeah,
And for me personally, I needed it. It was
yeah,
better than nothing.
yeah, yeah,
But when
definitely.
they first started doing them, there was no audio. So I
Mm.
would I would sit on the front row and laugh like a drain. And
Yeah,
I thought there'd be people knocking on the walls. I thought I'd get taken away,
yeah,
But when they opened up the audio and the comedians could time the jokes,
yeah,
the ones that could do it well did it really well.
yeah,
But a lot of them were very well, that's my set gone, and you
yeah,
need a set for a good year. You need to build up to an hour show and then do a tour and all the rest of it.
yeah,
Um, so certainly when the live gigs came back, I was so relieved,
yeah,
because the wonderful thing about live performance is you're in the moment and you never know
yeah.
what's going to happen next, and that's just magical.
And
I will go. I love to go 2 or 3 times a week, and on a weekend I'll go have something to eat. I'll have a few beers, and then I'll sit down and I'll say, right, here we go again.
yeah,
And my favorite actor, Jack Lemmon, always used to say before he made a film, he said, here we go again, magic time. And
yeah,
I can see what he means. It's like
yeah,
such a wonderful experience, and as I say, it's such a joyous thing.
yeah,
And when they're really going for it, it's wonderful,
yeah.
but so much better live than online.
Also, I think I watched quite a few of the ABC ones, and I think my favorite part about the ABC ones was the sets fantastic, but he'd always do an interactive conversation with someone,
Yeah,
and then it's just two people in a room. It's interactive, and everyone's having fun.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's
yeah.
the best way to do it when
He
you do it online.
he used to do like evenings with.
Yeah,
And it would be, yes, there'd be selling a book or whatever, but
yeah,
there's a bit like this. You would get their entire career
yeah,
in one night, and it was so well done.
yeah.
And to this day, I firmly believe that myself and James Gill are related, but we're not. I have a real brother, but he's my comedy brother.
Yeah. I mean, you have the same last name. It's basically determined, like for
Well,
sure.
he's from Leeds and I'm from Carlisle.
They're pretty close in the grand scheme of things. They're very close.
So who knows? But it would be wonderful. I must research my family tree. Who are your favourite comedians, past and present? Now there's a question. Did you have comedy growing up?
I watched a bit, but not a crazy amount. I don't think it was a huge part of my childhood. I mainly started watching a lot more comedy when I moved to the UK.
Right.
When I was 18. Also, when I was growing up, my parents were very strict. So anything with swearing, anything with lewd descriptions, anything with adult content I was not allowed to watch, which is most stand-up comedy. Um, so when I moved to the UK, I started watching a lot more. Favorite comedians is a loaded question because there's so many. I've been thinking about it, and every time I think about it, I think about narrowing it down, and I come up with 10 more names. Um, there's the obvious people. Everyone on Mock the Week. So Reese James, I love Nish Kumar, Sindhu V. I
Yeah.
think Sindhu V I've always loved, but the moment where I realized that she was actually a genius was um, watching her at a new material night where everyone was doing new material and she was supposedly doing new material and it sounded like 10 minutes off of Live of the Apollo. Is absolutely phenomenal. But
Yeah,
also,
she's so brilliant at the delivery,
yeah,
and that's
so good.
the key. You know, she
Mhm.
was on Ramesh Ranganathan's Weakest Link very recently,
Yeah,
and she win it, but it was like, what am I doing? What's the next question? And it was so innocent,
yeah,
and she won it.
yeah,
Yeah, and
so
that's
good.
her trick. You know, she's so good at doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And based off of the Fringe, just for some reason doing unpaid sponsorship for a few shows I saw. But the people who really blew my mind, where I was like, I want to be them, was Stuart Laws.
Oh, he's
Phenomenal.
brilliant. He's
Yeah,
brilliant.
Pierre
I saw
Novelli.
him very recently, and I thought, who's this? This guy's so original.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so good, so likable. And same with Pierre Novelli. Pierre Novelli
yeah.
was, it was one of the few shows, not one of the few shows, but it was a show where I left thinking to myself, maybe I should just give up because it was
it,
so
it
brilliant.
it was packed with laughs. He'd
Yeah,
literally gone to town with specific subjects and how do I squeeze the last amount of comedy out of this?
yeah,
And
I love that.
it was literally gag, 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 gag.
Yeah.
He was great.
And
My
Janine's show was great as well. Janine Haruni.
Oh yeah, she's really good. I'd love to interview her on here. I've seen her many, many times.
Yeah.
She's very good in buffering the Ian
Yeah.
Sterling comedy.
Yeah.
She's really good in her. She's a good actress as well.
Yeah.
The first ever comedian I saw was on holiday in Scarborough, aged 8,
Okay.
and it was Les Dawson of all people, and then
Interesting. Yeah.
that was 1977, and then
Wow. Yeah.
a year later we saw Tommy Cooper, which was just
Yeah.
incredible. And
So you've been watching comedy since you were a child,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, oh yeah, it's nearly, well, I'm 50, so it's nearly 50 years. I think it's 50 years next year, which is amazing. I mean, it's just on the blog there's something like 1,300 comedians.
Yeah.
And I make a note of everyone I've seen,
Yeah.
even if just acknowledging that I've seen them, because once you've got the blog, you can build it up each time you've seen them. So there's some absolute gems in there.
Yeah.
I saw Harry Hill before he was famous. I saw Frank Skinner before he was famous. Peter Kay.
You saw Frank Skinner before he was famous.
Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah. He was in a little tiny club.
Yeah.
And Peter Kay as well was in a club in Manchester.
Yeah.
He was fourth on the bill of 5 acts.
Yeah.
I laughed so hard at him, I missed the 5th act because I was still laughing. and I thought he's going to be a superstar. And
Yeah.
McIntyre, I first saw at Edinburgh before he was famous, play a little foot. Just these amazing gems. Frank Skinner, I'd never met, and I met him at Edinburgh this year. And I was very shy still, and I went up to him and I said, Frank. He went, yeah. I said, I'm so pleased to have finally met you because I've been a fan for years and I've just watched your show at Edinburgh, and can we have a photograph, please? And he went, oh, thank God. He said, of course we can. He said, I thought you were going to ask for a refund. I've done that many times, but it was a perfect line. That's the thing, you see. The wonderful thing is the memories you've got in the blog, but also as well is watching how all the comedians develop. So infamously, I say this a lot, but it's still my favorite opening line to any gig was Harry Hill. And I first saw him downstairs at the King's Head 30 years ago. and he was late for the show, and he brushed past me, he jumped on stage, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry I'm late. I had to have a testicle brought down." And then there was a pause and a laugh, and then he said, "From Derby." And when I met him 25 years later, I told him this story and went, "Rich," he said, "I still tell that." He's so good. And of course, it's just the comic effect, but they remember. The lovely thing about the blog as well is that all the comedians put testimonials on, which they want, if they want to, please do. If you want to send me a testimonial, I just add it on the email. One of my favorite ones was Alan Davis, who said, I can't ever remember these gigs, but it's so nice to be reminded, because bits of it, they clearly remember them all. My favorite one was James Acaster, who said, if I wasn't a comedian, I would happily sit next to Richard Gill all day and make him laugh. So, I mean, it's lovely, So anyway, like me, do you go to a lot of comedy gigs as a member of the audience, or have you ever?
I have. I think I would like to go more than I do. Because at Edinburgh, just going and watching people's shows as a member of the audience. And I actually went to a comedy gig yesterday to support a friend. Yeah, and I this has happened a couple of times now, where I feel like I should go to more comedy gigs, where when we're leaving or in the interval or something, someone turns to me and says, "You are the best audience member," just because I have a very, very loud laugh.
Ditto.
Yeah. And every time someone says that to me, every time someone says that, I'm like, why don't you? It's the best feeling in the world when someone says a joke and you can cackle at it. It's the best feeling in the world.
It's so good. It's so good. I was once in a play, watching a play about Tommy Cooper.
Yeah.
And I was with my then girlfriend, and there was me and my girlfriend, and everybody around us, it was packed.
Yeah.
And I laughed so hard at the actor playing Tommy Cooper that by the second half, everybody else had gone. And I'm like, was that me? What's going on? Wow. But no. Would you say that if you're on a bill of comedians and you're first on, would you stay till the end to watch the rest of them?
Yeah, every time. There's a couple of situations if you're doubling up, or some days you just feel off, or you're tired or ill or something like that, and you leave. It's rare that I would do that. Especially because if you're first on, that means a lot of the time the headliner is going to be someone fantastic,
right? And
it's always a good learning experience.
Experience, isn't it? It's all experience. You can only get better with experience. I've so much enjoyed chatting to you. It's been absolutely lovely. You've been a great guest. Just before we go, is there anything else you'd like to say? Where can people find you on social media? Do you have any podcasts or anything like that?
Just on all social media, I'm at Shalaka Kurup. So that's SHALAKAKURUP. Yeah, at Shalaka Kurup on everything.
Well, I for one, am going to be in the queue to see you again very, very soon.
Thank you.
I wish you every success with your comedy career. I really do.
Thank you very much. And I wish you very much success with your laughing career.
Thank you very much.
Not that you need it. You're doing very well without it.
You're very kind. Thank you. And all the best to you. Thanks a lot now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.